Copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act 1976. Allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use.
At 8 o'clock, time ticking away for serial killer Aileen Wuornos.
Her date with death set for about 90 minutes from now. 7's Patrick Frazier is live in Rayford as her sentence is about to be carried out.
Aileen Wuornos, born on February 29, 1956, in Rochester, Michigan, is one of America's most notorious female serial killers. Her life was marked by hardship, abuse, and a descent into violence that would lead to her conviction and eventual execution. Her father, Leo Pittman, was a diagnosed schizophrenic and convicted child molester who was imprisoned before Aileen was born and later committed suicide in prison. Her mother, Diane Wuornos, was only 14 years old at the time of her marriage to Leo, and she abandoned Aileen and her older brother Keith when Aileen was just 4 years old. They were left in the care of their grandparents, Lori and Britta Wuornos. Lori, an alcoholic, abused Aileen both physically and sexually, creating an environment of fear and instability. Aileen's early experiences of neglect and abuse were compounded by her difficulty adjusting to her new surroundings, leading to further psychological trauma. At 14, Aileen was raped by a family friend, resulting in an unwanted pregnancy. The baby was put up for adoption, and Aileen was sent to a home for unwed mothers. After the death of her grandmother, her grandfather, unable to cope with Aileen's troubled behavior, expelled her from the home. Left without support, Aileen became homeless, surviving through prostitution and petty crime. The harsh realities of her early life set a grim trajectory for her future. As an adult, Aileen's life continued its downward spiral. She moved from place to place, engaging in various criminal activities including theft, forgery, and armed robbery. Her first major arrest occurred in 1974, and she faced multiple charges over the years. In 1976, Aileen briefly married 69-year-old Louis Gratzfell, a wealthy yacht club president. The marriage ended in annulment after Aileen assaulted Fell, an incident that highlighted her escalating instability. Following the annulment, Aileen's behavior became increasingly erratic, characterized by a pattern of violent outbursts and impulsive decisions. She lived a transient lifestyle, moving frequently and struggling with poverty. Her reliance on prostitution for income, combined with a series of abusive relationships, further destabilized her life. By the late 1980s, her mental health deteriorated, marked by paranoia and delusional thoughts, which led her to carry a gun for protection and further escalated her involvement in criminal activities. Between December 1989 and November 1990, Aileen Wuornos killed 7 men, claiming self-defense in each case. Her victims included Richard Mallory, a 51-year-old electronics store owner, whom Aileen alleged had raped her. Mallory's body was found in a wooded area, and he had been shot multiple times. Following Mallory's murder, Aileen continued her killing spree, targeting men she met while working as a prostitute. The other victims were David Spears, Charles Carskadden, Troy Burris, Charles Humphreys, Peter Siems, and Walter Antonio. The pattern of shooting her victims multiple times and stealing their belongings indicated a level of premeditation. Aileen's claims of self-defense were inconsistent with the evidence, leading investigators to believe that the murders were driven by a combination of desperation and opportunism rather than mere self-defense. Aileen Wuornos was apprehended on January 9, 1991, after a nationwide manhunt. Police linked her to the murders through evidence from a stolen vehicle and pawned items belonging to the victims. Her girlfriend, Tyria Moore, played a critical role in Aileen's capture by cooperating with the police and providing evidence that led to Aileen's confession.
I met her in a bar.
The police had found Tyria in Ohio, where she agreed to set up her lover to confess.
We were sitting on the floor watching TV, and she just come out and said, "I have something to tell you." And I asked her what, and she said that she had shot and killed a man that day.
All right, the defendant Aileen Carol Wuornos being before the court, attended by attorney Tricia Jenkins, William Miller, and Billy Nolis, her attorney of record, having been tried and found guilty of crime count 1, a first-degree premeditated murder and first-degree felony murder.
During her trial in January 1992, Aileen was convicted of the murder of Richard Mallory. The trial received extensive media coverage, with the prosecution portraying Aileen as a cold-blooded killer and the defense arguing that she had acted out of fear for her life. Aileen's defense struggled to counter the damning evidence of premeditation and the pattern of her criminal behavior. She was sentenced to death, and she later confessed to the other 6 murders, receiving additional death sentences. Her subsequent appeals were denied, and she remained on death row. On October 9, 2002, Aileen Wuornos was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison. Her final years on death row were marked by severe mental health issues, including paranoia and erratic behavior. She declined a last meal, requesting only a cup of coffee, which reflected her deteriorating mental state. In her final statement, she made cryptic remarks about her return, reflecting her troubled mental state and a sense of unresolved conflict. Her execution brought an end to a life marked by extreme trauma and violence, and she remains one of the most infamous female serial killers in history. Dorothea Puente's story is one of the most haunting and complex criminal cases in modern history, blending elements of deception, exploitation, and murder into a chilling narrative. Her life, marked by a series of dark and disturbing events, reveals the depths of human depravity and the vulnerabilities of those on the fringes of society. Dorothea Helen Gray, born on January 9, 1929, in Redlands, California, was the 6th of 7 children. Her early life was characterized by instability and hardship. Her parents, who struggled with alcoholism and financial difficulties, were unable to provide a stable environment for their children. This tumultuous upbringing contributed to Dorothea's troubled adult life. At the age of 16, Dorothea married her first husband, but the marriage quickly dissolved. She went on to have several other relationships, including another short-lived marriage. In her early adulthood, she became known for petty crimes, including theft and fraud. In 1960, Puente was convicted of forging checks and sentenced to prison. Her time behind bars would mark the beginning of a pattern of criminal behavior that would escalate over the years. After her release from prison in 1966, Dorothea attempted to reinvent herself as a respectable citizen. In 1976, she opened a boarding house at 2100 F Street in Sacramento, California. The house was intended to provide shelter for elderly and mentally ill individuals, many of whom were vulnerable and marginalized. At first glance, Puente appeared to be a compassionate caretaker. She established a reputation for being kind and charitable, often going out of her way to help those in need. However, this facade was a carefully crafted cover for her true intentions. Dorothea Puente's crimes were not committed impulsively, they were methodically planned. Her modus operandi involved poisoning her victims with overdoses of prescription medications. She would use various substances, including sleeping pills and other sedatives, to incapacitate her victims before killing them. Once deceased, she would dismember the bodies and bury them in the backyard of her property. In some cases, she even used the bodies as a means of financial gain, cashing in on the deceased's Social Security benefits. Puente's ability to maintain a facade of normalcy while carrying out such horrific acts made her particularly dangerous. The investigation into Dorothea Puente began in 1988 after the disappearance of several tenants raised suspicions. Neighbors reported seeing Puente's tenants vanish, and concerns grew when a former tenant, who had been released from Puente's care, came forward with allegations of mistreatment. Authorities conducted a search of Puente's property on November 11, 1988. What they discovered was nothing short of horrifying. The search revealed human remains buried in the garden, leading to a full-scale investigation. Over the following weeks, more bodies were discovered, including the remains of 8 individuals who had been reported missing. The investigation revealed that Puente had been living a double life, managing her boarding house while simultaneously executing her grisly crimes. The discovery of the bodies confirmed the worst fears of the investigators and led to Puente's arrest. Dorothea Puente's trial began in 1990 and captured widespread media attention. The prosecution presented a mountain of evidence, including the forensic analysis of the bodies and testimony from former tenants and acquaintances. The defense argued that Puente was mentally ill and not fully responsible for her actions, but this argument failed to sway the jury. On March 19, 1990, Puente was convicted of 9 counts of murder. The court sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The trial revealed the extent of her manipulative and predatory behavior, with Puente showing little remorse for her actions. Following her conviction, Dorothea Puente spent the remainder of her life in prison. Her case continued to attract media attention, and she became a subject of fascination for those interested in criminal psychology and true crime. Puente's life behind bars was relatively quiet compared to her notorious past. She remained incarcerated at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla, California. Dorothea Puente died on March 27, 2011, at the age of 82. Her death marked the end of a dark chapter in criminal history, but her legacy endures as a grim reminder of the potential for evil in seemingly ordinary settings. Dorothea Puente's story continues to captivate and horrify. Her crimes highlight the vulnerabilities of those living on society's fringes and serve as a stark reminder of the dangers posed by those who exploit and manipulate. Puente's case has been the subject of numerous documentaries, books, and articles, reflecting the enduring interest in her life and crimes. Puente's legacy is a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk behind a seemingly benign facade. It underscores the importance of vigilance and compassion for the vulnerable, and the need for systems to protect those who are most at risk from exploitation and harm. Juana Barraza, known infamously as La Matabajadas or the Little Old Lady Killer, is a figure whose story deeply unsettles and fascinates. Born on July 27, 1958, in Mexico City, Juana's early life was marred by a series of traumatic experiences that would later shape her into one of Mexico's most notorious serial killers. Juana was born into a chaotic environment, with her mother abandoning her at a young age. This abandonment was followed by severe abuse from her stepfather, who inflicted physical and emotional torment on her. These formative years of neglect and violence profoundly affected Juana, embedding deep-seated anger and a sense of betrayal that would later influence her criminal activities. As she grew older, Juana struggled to find stability. Her adult life saw her oscillate between various low-paying jobs and her pursuit of a career in wrestling. In the wrestling ring, she earned some level of recognition under the name La Dama del Silencio, or the Lady of Silence. Despite her success in this arena, her personal life remained fraught with instability. Juana was a single mother, facing constant financial challenges and grappling with unresolved emotional trauma from her past. The transition from her relatively mundane life to one of violent crime began in the early 2000s. Juana adopted a methodical and sinister approach to her crimes. She targeted elderly women, often presenting herself as a health worker or a charitable visitor. By posing as someone who cared for their well-being, Juana was able to gain entry into their homes under the guise of providing assistance. Her victims, trusting and vulnerable, welcomed her in without suspicion. Once inside, Juana's demeanor would change dramatically. Her acts of violence were brutal and shocking. She used a range of methods to kill, including strangulation with the victim's own clothing or bludgeoning with heavy objects. The severity of her attacks was compounded by the fact that she often stole trivial items from the crime scene's low-value goods that seemed incongruous with the violence she inflicted. This pattern of theft would later become a critical clue in her eventual capture. The police investigation into Juana's crimes faced numerous challenges. For years, the authorities struggled to connect the seemingly unrelated murders. Each crime scene was different, and the randomness of the attacks made it difficult to discern a pattern. However, as the number of victims grew, investigators began to notice similarities in the nature of the crimes and the stolen items. A significant breakthrough came when forensic analysis linked several of the murders to the same suspect. Surveillance footage, witness testimonies, and physical evidence began to converge, painting a clear picture of Juana Barraza's involvement. Her arrest in 2006 was a pivotal moment in the case, as it brought a sense of relief and justice to a terrified public. Juana's trial was highly publicized, capturing the nation's attention. Her defense team argued that her violent behavior was a result of severe psychological trauma inflicted during her childhood. They presented evidence of her abusive past and mental instability, seeking to explain her actions as a consequence of her early experiences. However, the gravity of her crimes and the overwhelming evidence against her overshadowed these arguments. In court, Juana's demeanor was cold and detached, contributing to the public's perception of her as a remorseless killer. She was convicted of multiple counts of murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Her conviction was seen as a necessary step towards justice for her victims and a symbol of closure for the grieving families. Juana Barraza's imprisonment did not mark the end of her story. Her case has continued to provoke interest from psychologists, criminologists, and the general public. Numerous studies have been conducted to understand the psychological profile of serial killers and the impact of early trauma on criminal behavior. Juana's life in prison has involved ongoing psychological evaluations and assessments as experts seek to delve deeper into the complexities of her motivations and mental state. The story of Juana Barraza serves as a chilling reminder of how personal history and psychological trauma can intersect with violent criminal behavior. It underscores the importance of addressing mental health issues and providing support to individuals who may be at risk of perpetuating violence. Her case remains a disturbing yet crucial part of criminal history, highlighting the dark potential that can emerge from the depths of unresolved trauma and personal suffering. In the heart of the 20th century, America was captivated by the story of Nannie Doss, a seemingly unassuming woman with a disarming smile. Beneath her gentle demeanor, however, lurked a deadly secret. Nannie Doss was one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. Born on November 4, 1905, in Blue Mountain, Alabama, her murderous career spanned over 3 decades, during which she claimed the lives of nearly a dozen family members, all while maintaining the persona of a sweet, innocent grandmother. Nannie's early life was a breeding ground for the darkness that would eventually consume her. She was one of 5 children born to James and Louisa Hazel, a poor farming family. Her father was a harsh, domineering man, known for his strict discipline and emotional abuse. He forbade his children from attending social gatherings or forming meaningful relationships outside the family. This isolation fostered a deep sense of resentment within Nannie, who grew up feeling trapped, powerless, and unloved. At the age of 7, Nannie experienced a traumatic head injury when the family train jerked unexpectedly, causing her to fall and hit her head on a metal bar. This accident was later believed to have caused lifelong mental instability, contributing to her erratic behavior and violent tendencies. From that moment, Nannie's life was marked by headaches, depression, and fits of rage that would emerge sporadically throughout her life. Desperate to escape her father's control, Nannie married her first husband, Charlie Braggs, at the age of 16. The marriage was far from happy. Charlie's mother, who moved in with them, was as overbearing and critical as Nannie's father had been. Nannie began to drink heavily, and her once sweet nature darkened as her resentment grew. The couple had 4 daughters, but the strain of their tumultuous relationship took its toll. In 1927, tragedy struck when 2 of their daughters died mysteriously. Though the cause of death was attributed to food poisoning, Charlie was suspicious of his wife's role in the deaths. He took their surviving daughters and fled, leaving Nannie alone and embittered. Despite this setback, Nannie quickly moved on. Over the next several decades, she would remarry 4 more times, and each relationship would end in a suspicious death. Nannie's second husband, Frank Harrelson, was a hard-drinking, abusive man. Their marriage lasted 16 years, but in the end, it followed a familiar pattern of death. In 1945, after years of enduring Frank's abuse, Nannie decided to take matters into her own hands. She poisoned him by mixing arsenic into his whiskey, claiming he had died of food poisoning. This marked the beginning of a deadly pattern. Nannie would lure her victims in with her charm, only to poison them when they became inconvenient or abusive. Her 3rd and 4th marriages followed a similar trajectory. In 1947, she married Arlie Lanning, a man she met through a Lonely Hearts column. Their relationship was short-lived, as Arlie died under mysterious circumstances just 2 years later. His death was attributed to heart failure, but Nannie's pattern was beginning to raise eyebrows among those who knew her. In 1952, she married Richard Morton, a seemingly kind man who, like the others, became another victim of Nannie's deadly charm. Within months, Morton was dead, again from suspected heart failure, though Nannie had once again administered her deadly dose of arsenic. Nannie's final husband, Samuel Doss, was a Nazarene minister who had recently lost his family in a tornado. Unlike her previous husbands, Samuel was a good man who treated Nannie with respect and care. However, Nannie found him boring and controlling, especially when he disapproved of her romance novels and television programs. In 1953, Samuel fell ill with what appeared to be a severe digestive issue. He was hospitalized and eventually recovered, but upon his return home, Nannie served him a piece of pie laced with arsenic. Samuel Doss died shortly thereafter, and this time doctors became suspicious. An autopsy revealed large amounts of arsenic in his system, and Nannie's carefully constructed web of lies began to unravel. Nannie was arrested in 1954, and under interrogation, she confessed to the murders of 11 family members, including her husbands, her mother, her sister, 2 of her daughters, a grandson, and a mother-in-law. She claimed that she had killed out of love and mercy, often smiling and laughing during her confession, earning her the nickname the Giggling Granny. Her love of romance novels, where the heroines often sought love at any cost, seemed to blur the line between fantasy and reality for Nannie. In her mind, she was the tragic heroine, seeking happiness but finding only betrayal and disappointment. Her solution was simple: eliminate the problem. Nannie was sentenced to life in prison, spared the death penalty due to her gender. She spent her remaining years at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary, where she continued to exhibit her signature cheerful demeanor. She died in 1965, taking with her the dark secrets of a lifetime of manipulation, deceit, and murder. Nannie Doss's story is a chilling reminder of how evil can hide behind the most benign of facades. To her neighbors and friends, she was a sweet, harmless grandmother who loved her garden and romance novels. But to those who crossed her path, she was a cold-blooded killer, willing to murder those closest to her to satisfy her twisted desires. Her case remains one of the most notorious in American history, a stark portrayal of the darkness that can exist behind a smiling face. Joanna Dennehy was born in 1982 in St. Albans, Hertfordshire, England, and would go on to become one of the most notorious female serial killers in modern British history. Her story is a chilling narrative of manipulation, murder, and the sinister depths of human nature. Joanna Dennehy grew up in what seemed to be a fairly typical household. Raised by hardworking parents, her early years didn't provide many indications of the dark path she would eventually follow. As a child, Dennehy was described as a rebellious and confrontational individual. By her teenage years, she had begun to drink excessively, rebel against authority, and show signs of troubling behavior, such as running away from home and engaging in petty crime. Dennehy's relationships were often volatile, marked by aggression and manipulation. By her late teens, she had begun a relationship with a man named John Trainer, with whom she had 2 children. Despite becoming a mother, Dennehy's violent tendencies only grew, and her relationship with Trainer deteriorated as her behavior became increasingly erratic. Joanna Dennehy's relationship with her children has been notably troubled, casting a shadow over their lives from an early age. Their children, a son and a daughter, grew up in a chaotic and often dangerous household. From a young age, the children were exposed to an environment marked by violence, instability, and neglect. Dennehy's aggressive behavior and erratic actions created a home life fraught with tension and fear. The emotional and psychological impact on the children was significant. Reports from family members and social services reveal that Dennehy's children witnessed frequent arguments, physical confrontations, and other forms of abuse. This environment would have left lasting scars on their mental and emotional well-being. In her 30s, Dennehy moved to Peterborough, Cambridgeshire, where her most infamous chapter would begin. By this time, she was heavily involved in drug and alcohol abuse, and her behavior was becoming more violent. She developed a fascination with control, dominance, and cruelty, traits that would lead her down a path of murder. In Peterborough, she befriended a group of vulnerable men whom she could manipulate and control. Dennehy used her charm and psychopathic tendencies to assert dominance over those around her, leading to deadly consequences. Dennehy was described as someone who could switch between a charming personality and a vicious, cold-blooded killer in an instant. She reveled in causing pain, both emotional and physical. Her motivation for murder wasn't rooted in personal gain or even a vendetta, but was fueled by a desire to kill for the sheer thrill of it. As she later chillingly told psychiatrists, she killed because it was fun. Between March and April 2013, Dennehy embarked on a killing spree that would shock the nation. Her first victim was Lukasz Slabosowski, a 31-year-old Polish national who had befriended Dennehy. Lured to her home with the promise of alcohol and companionship, he was stabbed in the heart before being dumped in a wheelie bin. Dennehy, showing no remorse, moved on quickly to her next victim. The second man to die at her hands was John Chapman, a 56-year-old who lived in the same Peterborough building as Dennehy. Chapman was vulnerable and had struggled with alcoholism. He was stabbed to death in a similarly brutal fashion. Dennehy's final victim in Peterborough was her landlord, Kevin Lee, a 48-year-old property developer who had become romantically involved with her. Lee was also manipulated and murdered, his body later discovered dressed in women's clothing and dumped in a ditch. The staging of Lee's body was a disturbing indication of Dennehy's desire to humiliate her victims, and it reinforced the idea that her murders were motivated by a sick desire to control and degrade others. Dennehy's killing spree wasn't limited to Peterborough. She later traveled to Hereford, where she attempted to kill 2 more men in random, frenzied knife attacks. Both men survived but were left with serious injuries. Her cold-blooded manner during these assaults, which occurred in broad daylight, demonstrated her increasing recklessness and desire to continue her violent rampage. Dennehy was eventually arrested after a nationwide manhunt. She showed no remorse during her arrest and even joked with officers, further solidifying her reputation as a psychopathic individual. In custody, Dennehy boasted about her killings, showing no empathy for the lives she had taken. She told police that she had planned to kill 9 men in total, citing an obsession with the number. During her trial, Dennehy pleaded guilty to all charges, refusing to cooperate with any defense strategies that might suggest diminished responsibility due to mental illness. She wanted to be held fully accountable for her actions, claiming that her murders were acts of deliberate cruelty. Psychiatrists would later diagnose her with psychopathic and antisocial personality disorders, but Dennehy seemed proud of her actions, reveling in the media attention her case generated. In February 2014, Joanna Dennehy was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge described her as a cruel, calculating, and manipulative individual who had committed exceptionally brutal murders. Dennehy is one of only a handful of women in the UK to have received such a sentence. Serial killer Joanna Dennehy told her prison fiancé she was a fully committed psychopath in a harrowing love letter. Dennehy, 39, who was jailed in 2014 after killing 3 men during a 10-day spree, was engaged street robber Haley Palmer while they were both behind bars. The pair both were incarcerated at the privately run HMP Bronzefield in Middlesex, but they split after being moved to separate prisons. In prison, Joanna Dennehy remains a troubling figure, embodying the very essence of danger and unpredictability even while confined behind bars. Despite being sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, Dennehy's presence continues to be a source of unease among both inmates and staff. Her reputation for violent outbursts has not diminished since her incarceration, rather. It has intensified. By the time Traynor turned 14, she hadn't seen her mother in 4 years. She often questioned, "Why isn't she here? Am I not good enough?" Her mother's arrest triggered a flood of fear, anger, and emotional pain. "I cried until I had no tears left. I completely broke down and fell to the floor," Traynor recalled. "My first thought was, am I going to turn out like her? Is that my future?" Even as a young girl, Traynor had sensed that her mother was both provocative and subtly manipulative with men. On April 12th, investigators were finally granted permission to interview Dennehy, who had been diagnosed with paraphilia sadomasochism. When questioned about the stabbings, she simply replied, "No comment." Despite her refusal to speak, police had already built a solid case against her. The authorities' primary concern was that Dennehy might plead insanity. However, on November 18, 2013, she stunned everyone, including her own legal team, by pleading guilty to 3 murders and 2 attempted murders. According to criminologist Dr. Casey Jordan, this was Dennehy's way of claiming even more notoriety and maintaining control as she revealed on Living with a Serial Killer. The Joanna Dennehy case remains one of the most shocking and disturbing in British criminal history, captivating and horrifying the public and criminal experts alike. Dennehy's actions exemplify the horrifying reality that the darkest impulses can reside in seemingly ordinary individuals. Her ability to manipulate and dominate those around her, combined with her calculated approach to murder, exposes a chilling aspect of human nature that defies conventional understanding. The Joanna Dennehy case remains a stark and unsettling reminder of the potential for darkness that can exist within ordinary people, forever marking her as one of the most disturbing figures in modern criminal history.